Welcome to the Pretty Powerful Podcast, where powerful women are interviewed every week to share real inspiring stories and incredible insight to help women or anyone break the barriers, be a part of innovation, shatter the glass ceiling, and dominate to the top of their sport, industry, or life's mission. Join us as we celebrate exceptional women and step into our power. And now, here's your host, Angela Gennari.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Pretty Powerful Podcast. My name is Angela Gennari, and today I'm here with Morgan Taylor. Hi, Morgan.
Hey, Angela. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for being here. So, Morgan Taylor is a board-certified pediatric nurse practitioner and the chief nursing officer at Archer Review. With a deep commitment to nursing education and community building, Morgan has made significant strides in enhancing the preparedness and support for over 500,000 nursing and MP students. Very cool. So, first question, of course, what made you want to get into nursing?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, at first in my life, I didn't want to be a nurse. My ambition in life was to be a ballerina.
Oh, wow.
And
Nice.
not in a 5-year-old, I want to wear a tutu way. I was very seriously studying ballet. And in my sophomore year of high school, had a significant back injury that took that potential away. And I thought, okay, I have to get serious about my grades. I have to try to get into college. That wasn't really what I was focused on, at least at the time. And people were talking about nursing. I had been exposed to nursing just with family members that had various health conditions. And I thought, you know what, that's easy enough. Let me give that a go. So went to school to get my bachelor's of science in nursing, ended up loving it, and then began my career as a pediatric nurse at Duke University in North Carolina.
Huge nursing program there, medical program. It's when you come onto the campus, it's literally the first thing you see, this
It's
massive
enormous.
structure of a hospital. It's a beautiful campus.
It is huge.
But
that
yeah.
and the chapel. It's
Yes.
a huge, beautiful chapel. The
Yes.
campus is gorgeous for sure. And because of the size of the health system, there are a lot of complex cases and just opportunities to learn. So I got to work in the pediatric float pool, which means that I floated around to different pediatric units based on the needs. So if there were tons of patients in the ICU, I would go there. If the emergency department was really busy, I would go there. So I got to get training in pretty much every area of pediatrics, and that ended up being the best opportunity I could have hoped for.
Well, that's really cool. So I didn't know that was even a thing. So I've heard of travel nursing, and that's different, right? That's where you go from hospital to hospital.
Exactly. And that is what the next step in my nursing journey was. After I did several years at Duke, I said, you know what? I've really learned the Duke way. I know what we do here. And people kept saying, it's different at different places.
Yeah.
So I signed up for travel nursing. The first contract I took was at Seattle Children's, other side of the country. My husband and I packed our life into one car, drove across the country.
Wow.
And my very first day, I was like, oh my gosh, everyone's right. They do things totally differently. Who knew that there was more than one way to skin a cat? There's, different medications, different protocols that who's to say which one is the best or the right? It can vary depending on the situation. And I realized I had so much more to learn. I thought I had, figured out all the little ins and outs, but I had only learned in that one environment. So beginning that chapter of my life where I traveled from hospital to hospital, like you said, really was very fruitful for my own education.
Absolutely. It's always good to have just a perspective, right? Perspective on, because there is not a one size fits all solution. And
That's
so
true.
you might have also regionally, you might have different cases, you're not going to have hypothermia in Florida, but
yeah, hopefully not.
So yeah, I imagine that regionally your cases are very different, even in pediatrics. So
Yeah, absolutely. Different places have different providers that specialize in certain things. When I
Mm-hmm.
worked at Boston Children's, they had a big specialty in something called a long gap EA. So it's a very specific
Interesting.
type of congenital anomaly that I had
Okay.
literally never ever seen. I'm like years and years into pediatric intensive care, and I had never seen one of these before. It was like 50% of the patients we had in that
Wow.
ICU because that's what that surgeon did. And they did it the best of anywhere in the world. So we would have patients flying in from, oceans away to receive that surgery there. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the learning in medicine and nursing, it never stops. There's
Right.
always something new. There's something new coming out. So it really is very, very fruitful to get that experience in different areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have to ask, we're 4 years out now, but how did COVID impact, your nursing career and what you saw from hospital to hospital?
Yeah, very influential. So I was still working at Duke in that time. And
Uh-huh.
because I was in the float pool, like we talked about, I was
Mm-hmm.
the first person to be sent to different areas. And in pediatrics, we weren't hit as hard. Young
Mm-hmm.
kids, healthy young kids, weren't getting very sick from COVID. They may be sick, but not ICU sick. They weren't
Right.
on ventilators
Mm-hmm.
at the same rates that our elderly or immunocompromised patients were. So,
Sure.
with
Yeah.
that being said, I got pulled into the adult world and I had
Ah.
never ever treated adults before. So, there was a steep learning curve there. Very thankful to all of my peers who taught me a lot on the job in the moment as I pivoted there.
Mm-hmm.
But, for those who aren't in medicine, kids and adults, they're not just different size, same thing. Very, very different types of medicine, different protocols. So for me, it was hugely influential in my knowledge base because I really jumped into a whole new world.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So in college, I studied child psychology.
Oh,
And so
cool.
then that kind of transitioned into adult world psychology. And that was kind of my focus, but my focus was on children specifically and how they're how a traumatic, a traumatic event impacts their life later. And so but it is so fascinating because children, I feel, are so much more predictable than adults. And so
Interesting.
with children, you have a traumatic event and children are way more resilient than we give them
Oh, yeah.
credit for. They're amazing.
Very
They're
resilient.
amazing, but they need that support system.
Mm.
They need that comforting adult to be there to listen to them and to help them work through because they don't have the emotional capacity for a
Yeah.
lot of what they're dealing with. So how do you see children in ICU environments and in environments like that where it's so scary, they don't have a frame of reference for it? Do they handle it better or worse than adults, do you think?
Exponentially better. You
Really?
used the exact word that I used to tell people why I picked pediatrics, which is
Yes.
resilience.
Yes.
Kids can overcome nearly anything. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
have worked with some of the sickest of the sick children, and a year later they come back to visit and they're walking around, they're throwing the ball,
Yes.
they're living their best lives. Not to say
Mm-hmm.
that always happens. There are, of course, really tragic outcomes, but they are the minority. Most of the time, kids bounce back in a way that adults just cannot do. And they handle the environment way better. They are
Mm-hmm.
adaptable. It goes
Mm-hmm.
back to what you said. I think if we give them the support system, if we try to gauge where are they at, what do they need, and meet them where they are, they
Mm-hmm.
adapt to that and most of the time overcome. And that is such a blessing to watch. It's one of my favorite parts of pediatric medicine.
Absolutely. No, I 100% agree with you because when I was studying children and working with them, and I was working with them in tough environments like, juvenile justice system.
Oh,
And so, I
wow.
mean, I was dealing with them when they were going through a lot,
Really hard
but,
times.
a lot of the issues in their life were caused by the adults in their life.
Yeah.
But I found that they still had so much hope and optimism. They still had that, I want to get better. I want a different environment. They don't have the same, pessimism that an adult has. An adult gets in their
That's
head
right.
and, it hasn't worked out so far. It's never going to work out. It's just
Never.
what it is. So
You're so
children,
right.
children always believe that it's going to work out. And so, yeah, I imagine in a pediatric medical environment, it's very
Mhm.
similar.
Yep, I couldn't agree more.
Hmm. So, so then you went into teaching nursing.
I
So
did,
how did that transition happen?
it's not something that I ever planned. It's
Mhm.
something that really just fell into my lap along the way.
Yeah.
Around about this same time, it's COVID. I'm pulled over to adults. We're in the emergency room, just very hectic, very chaotic. I
Hmm.
saw the preparedness level of the new nurses joining our profession absolutely plummet. They were
Really?
not getting the support, the resources, the training that they needed to then enter these complex medical situations and do so with, the level of competence that we would expect. And
Yep.
what one thing I will say, no one goes into their first day of nursing like, I got this. Let's go. I'm a confident nurse. That's just
Right.
not how it happens. But usually we have robust training programs that you
Yeah.
come out of school and you go through a long orientation and you learn a lot on the job. And though we still have that, you can imagine in a COVID packed emergency room, it
Right.
wasn't really working. And these nurses, therefore, were not supported and they left really quick. Nurses are
Wow.
still leaving the bedside at record fast rates. The most recent data is about 50% of new nurses are out of the profession in 2 years, which is
Wow.
less time than they spent learning to be a nurse. And I
Wow, that's
find that
crazy.
alarming and just really, I'm very saddened and know that we can do better. So for me, my wheels are turning. I'm thinking, where does this start? How do we impact it? It's very multifaceted, but my brain kept going back to this has to start from day one. This
Yeah.
starts with how we educate our next generation of professionals. And I
Hmm.
really felt like there were gaps that could be filled. So that was when I started innovating. I met my co-founder, Karthik, who is a medical oncologist who was doing some
Hmm.
work in this area. We really hit it off, and he brought me on to develop the nursing curriculum for Archer Review. It started out with like videos in my closet, and I'm like
Wow.
writing questions over here, and slowly but surely we started paving the way for really a community platform that could support nurses from day one of their education throughout their entire career.
That's really smart because I mean, I think you're exactly right. I think people are coming out of it, out of schools now, lacking confidence and competence to really be the at the same level as their
Yeah.
peers, and that's it's scary. And I don't know how that's happening. Are they fast tracking people in the education system? Are they, they lowering the bar? Like this is one thing that I really don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, it's absolutely multifactorial, but there are a few key areas I've picked up on that I'm
Hmm.
trying to work towards addressing that I do think make a big impact. First is we have a shortage of nursing faculty. There's just not enough of them. They're retiring, and we don't have more nurses going into education. So the cohorts of nursing schools are getting bigger and bigger and bigger with less instruction. Nursing is a really hard degree. That bachelor's degree has some of the highest number of exams, of boards, of papers, of clinical hours of all bachelor's degrees out there. And it's kind of an emotional profession to get into as you're going into clinical rotations for the first time. You're seeing people who are very ill, who are passing away. You're navigating the intricacy of communicating with families. And if you don't have faculty that's there to support you, to guide you, to talk it out with you, you might just drop out of school, or you're going into day one with a lowered competency or just, not the confidence to jump into this. So I do think that the number of faculty, the robust support system we have in our education systems has at least a part of the role to play there.
Interesting. So, do you find any of it to be generational? just because I know as an employer, I can definitely see generational differences in work ethic and, the
Right.
amount of resiliency that they have. And, kind of going back to our conversation about children and needing that adult support system,
Mhm.
I do feel that, a lot of people have coddled their children too much, like they've gone too far wanting
Uh-huh.
to do everything for them, and now they can't handle stress, they can't
Mhm.
handle, commitment, they can't handle certain aspects of life that you learn in childhood through
Yeah.
that resiliency, through
Mhm.
that, that fall down, get back up, fall down, get back up,
Back
like
up.
that.
Yeah,
And so I do find as an employer, I see a lot of generational differences. Now, of course, you always have anomalies. You always have
of
those people who
course.
are just rock stars no matter what. But,
Mhm.
I do feel that there's a generational difference between, the people who are coming out of college now
Uh-huh.
versus the ones who had come out 20 years ago. Very different.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And it's for me just anecdotally, I don't have numbers to back this up
Sure.
or anything,
Yeah.
but something I've seen in the past, I'll say 5 years, give or
Yeah.
take, is a dramatic decrease in attention span for how long
Mhm.
I can provide educational content and really retain the focus of the students. I used to put out like hour-long lectures. And then we were
Mhm.
like, oh, that's a lot. Let's break it up. Let's chunk it out into 20-minute lectures. Now nobody wants to see anything longer than a TikTok video. And I'm
Mhm.
sorry, but you can't go to nursing school on
No.
TikTok. That it's like
Well,
the bane of my existence.
that's I get it. And you can't also learn from YouTube, which I learn a lot from YouTube,
Yeah,
but there's limitations.
there are
So there are
limitations. I
limitations.
always say it's like an adjunct. It's like you didn't quite get that. Okay,
Yeah.
go out and find something
Yeah.
supplementary, but you can't get your whole curriculum there.
No, because they're not vetted, right? So you don't
Right?
know who's teaching you this stuff. I talked to some of my Gen Z employees, and I was asking them, like, where do you get your news? Where do you get your information?
Yeah.
And almost exclusively, it's the internet,
Yep. Uh-huh.
TikTok or
Mhm.
Instagram. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's not news. Like, you don't know
Right.
nobody has been vetted to like give you the
And it's,
authority. They're not the authority on a topic.
as someone who really wants to engage with this audience and produce fruitful conversations,
Yeah.
it's this weird balancing act of I need to put content out on those
Yes.
platforms. Um, but the expectation is, I'm giving you a nugget of something that hopefully provides value, but I really want you to engage in a more robust platform where
Yes.
I can, teach you for a little bit longer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And some students absolutely get that. Others, they really want those very, very short little bites of information. And that's a big challenge.
Yeah. Well, and I hear the average attention span is something like 8 minutes now, which is just scary.
Yeah.
It's just scary. I'm
You
like,
can just only get so far in 8 minutes.
I know. Like by the time you finish your hellos and introductions, you're 4 minutes
You're
in.
done.
You have 4 minutes to
You're
grab whatever
so
you.
right. You're so
But
right.
yeah, so it's very interesting. So how do you then produce content that is engaging enough and, at the rate of attention span that people have? How do you do that?
Yeah, so there's two big strategies we've taken, and depending on if our content is being engaged with live or in an on-demand platform.
Uh-huh.
So really, we hope that students will engage with us, live, come to a webinar, get a lot out of it. But we want them to also be able to follow a curricula at their own pace when they have
Yeah.
time. So
Uh-huh.
we really do drive home that on-demand kind of library of content. And what we've tried to do is kind of make it like a Netflix for nursing skills. So
Uh-huh.
we'll have a whole season of, let's say, cardiovascular knowledge. And then you get little episodes. So, you talk about heart failure for 8 minutes, you talk about a cardiac arrest for 9 minutes, and then they can say, play next, play next.
Yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah.
take breaks. They can
Hmm.
listen to those chapters on the go, in their car, while they're on a walk. I've seen a big uptick in people taking their content on the go, which I'm personally a big
Interesting.
fan of.
Yeah, yeah.
I learn best when I'm in motion.
Yeah.
And I think other students do too. So making it
Hmm.
versatile, breaking it into chapters, I think has been very useful. But as far as when we're engaging with our students live, we've really tried to innovate using gamification of learning to get them into the session.
Oh,
They're sitting
interesting.
there just listening. How easy it is to pull up, your email, your
Yeah.
TikTok, your Instagram. I mean, you're only half, if that, there, unless you're actively participating. So we use a platform where there's like a little QR code. They scan it. They can like buzz in to answer questions. They compete to get on a leaderboard. And it really turns it into this community participating in the session. And they're with you 100%. And they walk away with so much more.
Oh, I love that so much because you're absolutely right. If it's interactive, then people want to stay engaged because I'm very competitive, but I'm also
Yep.
someone who, if I'm like, I listen to Audible at the gym because just like you were saying, when you're in motion, you kind of
Mhm.
retain things better. So if I'm on the treadmill, I'll be listening to an audiobook on, I don't know, scaling up or
Yeah,
doing
totally.
something fun,
I love it.
but I retain it better because I'm in motion and it gives me something to really it actually prolongs the time that I'm at the gym because normally if I'm listening to music I'm like okay okay I'm done bye.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas
Forget about
if
it.
I'm in
Yeah.
an audiobook I'm like I have 10 more minutes of this, I'll keep going, right?
I'll
Like I
keep going. I'll keep
yeah.
listening to this. I
So
couldn't agree more. I
yeah,
remember the exact moment in undergrad when it clicked for me that like
yeah,
that was how my brain was retaining info. I
yeah,
was listening to a lecture in my headphones while I was like on a walk or something. And then later that week I had a test on that information and I had like an out of body experience where I remembered where I was on the walk when I had heard that bit of information
yep,
that I was using to answer that test question.
yeah,
And I was like, oh, soaked all that up. Like that worked for me.
that's great.
It doesn't work for everybody, but I advocate to all of my students, try different things, try different methods of studying until you feel what clicks for you, because everyone is different. And if you really focus on studying smarter, not, harder necessarily, you're way more effective.
Have you heard of this book called You Happier?
No.
So Dr. Amen is he is some kind of physician, I think neuro
Okay.
I don't know. But anyway, he wrote a book called You Happier, and it's all about understanding your brain type and how your brain type needs certain foods, needs certain exercise, needs certain engagement, and your brain type will basically like if you're feeding it's like making your brain happy by what you're putting into it and how you're getting information out of it. So it
Okay.
was fascinating, and I'm still kind of finishing the book, but one of the chapters that I just finished is called I think it's called grounding, but to retain information, for me, because I have what's called a spontaneous brain, which can be a little ADD, which just it makes sense of why I need to be at the gym because I'm actively doing something,
Sure.
but also listening. And so it's something that I can do and listen to, but I have to like not let myself get caught up in the subtitle stuff of the TVs. Like I
Sure.
can't actually read two things and retain them both. So so I'm constantly trying to figure out like how do I, keep that focus. And so one of the things that he suggests is this thing, and I think it's called grounding, and I may be butchering that, but I think it's called grounding, where you walk you in your mind, you visualize, like let's just say you're trying to remember, the chemicals, right? Or medications. You go into, you visualize going into one room of your house and you read all of these different medications and you memorize these medications. You go into a next room of your house and you go through the same thing, but it's like you go from place to place to place and you just
Okay.
chunk the information into that place. And so then when you say, okay, so let's talk about the medications involved with diabetes. Oh,
Sure.
that's my living room. Okay, in my living room we have blah blah
Okay.
blah. And so you're kind of putting these things in a place
Uh-huh.
that has a physical presence wherever you are. So
Very cool.
it's interesting because it's a good way to remember because you're chunking the information, but you're associating it with something that you care about, like your home, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah, and that's the grounding of really
yeah,
giving it something to latch on to. I
right.
love that
Right.
concept.
These aren't just things I have to memorize because that's like our
Sure.
weakest, our
Oh,
weakest
yeah.
form of memory is just like, oh, I'm just going to remember it. And
Just
so,
like
but
brute force, and then it
yeah,
exits stage
yeah,
left as soon as you're done with it.
exactly. The only thing I've ever retained is like the Gettysburg Address. It's like the only thing that
You still got it.
but yeah, but yeah, when you associate it with something or with a food that you love or something that
Okay.
makes your brain happy, your brain remembers it better. So anyway, just food for thought,
I
literally.
love that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to put that on my reading list.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, it's good. And it tells you a little bit more about like, the foods that help your brain and because like there are certain things that aren't good for me to be consuming, like, obviously sugar, but
Sure.
especially for my brain type, it just doesn't, it kind of overacts, I don't know. But it's an interesting book. You should definitely check it out. And I think it's very relevant to what you were saying with like this, how we interact. We know so much more than we've ever known about how to learn.
Uh-huh.
And so now it's about applying those principles and doing it effectively. But
Definitely.
I love that you're setting it up like a Netflix because it's very what people are doing anyway, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, it's gotta be user friendly. It's gotta
yes.
just flow naturally, path of least resistance, right? The
Yeah.
harder it feels, the less
Mhm.
likely they are to really gain something from it. So if we make
100%.
it, and that goes back to like my whole philosophy on teaching. And part of what I'm trying to do at Archer Review is bring joy back into education.
Yeah.
I felt like nursing school was this scary, big bad wolf that they were weeding people out, only the strong are going to survive. And it just wasn't fun. Okay. I
Right.
mean, it was just not a good time. And
Hmm.
not to say that, it shouldn't be hard. It is a challenging thing to do. But why do we have to make it scary? Why do
Right.
we have to make it intimidating? I don't think we do. I think we can
Hmm.
lighten up, make fun of ourselves a little bit, have a good time. I love the profession of nursing. And if I can pass that joy off to the next generation, I think they'll stick around for longer and be more fulfilled in their careers. So
Absolutely.
really just making the platform fun, making our content fun, it I think goes a long way.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it builds confidence,
Yeah.
because if you learn something in a book and it's your standard coursework, you're going to when you're put into a real world scenario, and you have to try to remember the textbook, and the textbook is the hardest thing in the world to remember, just like we were saying. But if you've done this gamification and you've done these videos and somebody has actively engaged and really enjoys the stuff that they're teaching you, then it's going to stay with you longer and you're going to have that confidence to go into it a little bit
I
more confident.
completely agree. The
Mhm.
biggest compliment and the most reward that I feel from this is when a student reaches out and says, "Morgan, I could hear your voice in my head when I was taking that exam."
That's awesome.
Like, all right, we've done
Yes.
something. You've got this. And it does, it feels so good.
That's awesome. So, coming out of nursing school, where do you feel like the biggest challenge is for new nurses?
I think finding your footing and your confidence to really
Mhm.
engage with your peers and ask the right questions. we really set the bar so high for ourselves, thinking we should know everything. We
Right.
should be this confident, competent, amazing nurse. And the truth is, none of us came out of nursing school like that. We were all
Mm-hmm.
these, little baby nurses that didn't know what was going on. And we were really scared. We wanted to fit in. We wanted to ask
Mm-hmm.
the right questions, but not look like we were, silly. And finding your footing, coming into yourself and getting that confidence to just engage, not be afraid to ask the questions. That is brutal. It's a really, really challenging thing to do. I think it comes back to just, how secure you are in your own skin as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a delicate time, and it really is a challenge.
Yeah, it really is. Well, and confidence is one of those things where I feel like there's so much growth we can do as women, on being confident, especially in the workforce.
Yes.
So I do a talk on confidence, and one of the things that we talk about is you don't have to know all the information. You just have to ask the right questions. Because if you go in and you just fumble through it and you don't really know what you're doing, you're gonna lose confidence because you're gonna be
Totally.
like, well, I screwed that up, But
Mhm.
if you just ask somebody, hey, can you show me one more time? I just want to make sure that I do this right. Or can
Yep.
you just, help me with this one thing? I want to make sure that I get this right. That shows confidence. That doesn't show, incompetence. And so I think that's where we
Completely
get
agree.
confused is we don't want to ask questions because we want to feel like like you're
Yeah.
saying, we know everything already.
I think there's this mentality hanging around that we can fake it till we make it.
Yeah, I hate that.
And
I hate that
it,
so much.
I really hate that. Yes, I'm like, don't fake it. Please do not
Yeah,
fake
yeah.
anything.
Learn.
That
Yeah.
is not going to help you. That's not going to help the other nurses, the
Hmm.
patients. Like, please don't fake anything.
Yeah.
I kind of try to set my students up with like, here's a script you can follow. Here's some
Hmm.
verbiage you can use. And it's as simple as, you know what? I'm not sure. Let me go find the answer for
Yeah,
you. No
exactly.
patient is going to come down on you. I mean, I shouldn't say no. We
Well,
never know. Never
yeah.
say never. But most of the time, the vast majority of the time, you
Hmm.
tell somebody, "Hey, I'm just not sure, but let me go find out for you." Oh, no
Hmm.
problem. They would much rather you go find the answer than make something up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because nobody, I mean, we're sometimes, I mean, in nursing, you're dealing with life and death situations at
Yep.
sometimes. So, you definitely don't want to get to the point where you're just kind of fumbling your way through it because you get somebody's life or health on your hands.
No, no
Not good.
fumbling, no faking allowed.
Yeah.
Just ask the questions. Yeah, I agree. And once you get into that groove and you find your footing and start to see that, I really do think it starts to get easier, but it takes some
Yeah.
time. And it also
Hmm.
takes the right role models. If you
Yeah.
don't have a preceptor, a charge nurse, any sort of figure to look up to that's modeling that behavior, you're gonna struggle more. So
Yeah.
all in all, that's one of my missions at Archer is, really from day one of your education, setting that expectation
Yeah.
that it is okay to ask those questions, that it is okay to demand to be treated with respect, to really exemplify that. Because if we can raise this next generation of nurses to go into the jobs with that expectation and that skill set, it'll transform the profession as a whole. No one will expect you to fake it till you make it.
Exactly. Exactly. So to pivot a little bit, who inspires you?
Oh man. Nurses as a whole, the profession is so tenacious. There are
Yeah.
so many out there that really have shown me what it is to be inspired.
Mm,
Yeah, so rather than just one person, I think the nursing profession is what inspires me because they are really able to pivot to wear 10 different hats in this most
hmm.
recent phase of my career away from the bedside. I've met nurses as innovators, as CEOs, as, board members, and learned so much that I had no idea was possible for nurses, for women, to really reach that level of, I'm a decision maker.
Hmm.
I carry some weight. I sit at the table here. So really seeing that power and influence has been incredibly inspiring.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah, nurses in general, I just think are very inspiring because I mean they're in a career that's literally just saving lives and helping people. So yeah, I think they're the unsung heroes. Doctors are okay, but nurses
We'll work with them too.
nurses are really the rock stars. That's awesome. So what challenges have you overcome in just in transitioning from nursing to teaching nurses?
Yeah. One of the big challenges is really just learning to adapt to
Hmm.
what this newer generation is looking for, like we talked about with the shorter attention spans,
Sure.
and
Hmm.
also being willing to admit when something's not working and pivot.
Yeah.
It can be really hard for me once I've solidified an idea and I think it's really going to be amazing.
Right.
It doesn't always work
Yeah.
out. And I have had to learn that it's okay to kill it and move on. It
Hmm.
is not, the death of me, the death of my company. We don't get it right 100% of the time. And I'm doing more harm than good by just like clinging on for dear life rather than saying, all right, that's not really what they were looking for. Let's learn from that, pivot, innovate, and make it better.
Yeah. Love that. For sure. Yeah, I think as entrepreneurs, that's one thing we struggle with because
It's
everything is our
hard.
baby. Everything is our baby and it's all ego
Yes,
tied, right? And so they
totally.
always say, don't let your ego get involved. And being an entrepreneur is one of the most ego crushing things that you can ever do.
100%.
So if you really want to be humbled, start a company and you'll find out
Start a
how.
company. You get told
Whew.
no 3 times. Like it's just it is soul crushing. You're right.
Yeah, it's soul crushing, but you learn and you become resilient.
Hmm.
So, so as women, we give our power away a lot. We tend to give other people credit for our work, or we tend to, take criticism when it wasn't,
Hmm.
justified. And, so where do you feel like in your past that you've ever given your power away, and another time that maybe you've stepped into your power?
Okay. You know what? Every family gathering I've ever been to in my life, does anyone else just like revert to their teenage self
Uh-huh. Mhm.
and just, I become so not powerful in any way? I mean, I can like vividly think about like last month at Thanksgiving, to
Yeah.
my extended family's like, so what are you doing now? And instead of like, oh, I'm running a prominent nursing education company.
Yeah.
I'm just teaching on Zoom.
Uh-huh.
I'm like,
Yeah.
why are these words coming out of my mouth?
Right.
They're like, I have a doctorate degree and I
Yes.
can't like express that
Hmm.
to my family. I don't know what it is. I don't know if anybody else relates with that.
Yeah.
But I definitely give my power away at things like that.
Yeah, I do too. And now that you say that, it's so interesting because I grew up in Pennsylvania and I grew
Okay.
up in it was a very blue collar town. And I remember when I graduated from college, I decided not to move back home. I decided to move to Atlanta. So I graduated from University of Maryland and I moved to Atlanta. And so I started working and, just kind of started moving along. But every time I would go home, if people asked me what I do, oh, I graduated from college, and I busted my butt, right? I graduated on the dean's list. But if I say any of that around my family, I remember getting a few comments of, oh, you think you're too good for us. Oh, you think you're better
Uh-huh.
than us. Oh, oh, you're so fancy now. And it almost like I became out of the club
Sure.
if I was, promoting myself in any
Yeah.
way whatsoever. So I would always downplay it. I would always downplay it and
Always.
like, yeah, no, nothing much. Oh, it's the same
Nothing
old thing.
much.
Oh, just
Oh, I
working a
say
lot.
that all the time. Nothing
Yep.
much. And
Yep.
I'm like, no, I literally just went through a private equity
Yes.
transaction. I'm
Yes.
scaling this company. Like,
Exactly. Yeah.
why am I afraid? I think I'm so afraid of sounding boastful
Yeah.
that I would rather just shut myself down.
Yeah.
And that is something I need to work on.
Yeah.
Because there is a line between discussing and being honest and being boastful. Just because we're talking about it, we're not necessarily boasting. And that's hard.
Absolutely. You're right. Absolutely. It's very hard, especially as women, because we're kind of
Yes.
expected that, and then I'm around, people that, maybe have chosen a different path. They didn't go the career
Mhm.
path. They decided to, just raise a family, or not say just raise a family. That's obviously a very
It's
tough
like
thing
the
to do.
hardest job ever.
But
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. But they decided to take a different path. And so around them, I'm also very cautious about, like, I don't want to say anything that I'm doing with my career because I don't want to sound like I'm arrogant or that I'm boasting. But yeah,
Right.
it's a very interesting dynamic, especially for women, because I think that we feel like we have to stay in this little box that
In this
people expect
box.
of us.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
Yeah.
Um, and for the latter half of your question here, really, I very recently had an experience where I felt like I stepped into that power a little bit more, but not on the family side, with my company, with my
Good.
team. We had an all team, all hands retreat for the end of the year, celebrating
Nice.
what we had accomplished, looking forward. And I've had a habit of really downplaying what our goals are out of
Mm,
fear that we wouldn't achieve them. I never want to let any of my employees down. I only want to tell them about things that are certain so that they don't feel the pain of things that fall through inevitably, as
yeah,
we know happens.
sure. Yeah.
Um, and this year I decided for our closing remarks, I was really going to shoot for the moon. I was going to give them my full unfiltered vision of everything I think and know that we can be without holding back. And it felt so good to just really let loose and say, we are going to be the premier, nursing education company. And here are all these things that we are going to accomplish. It was so invigorating. The response from everybody was so positive, fully aware, maybe some of these things aren't going to necessarily happen tomorrow or at all. I know how this path goes, but I'm not going to be afraid of putting it out there, of setting the bar really high. And it was wonderful.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. That's amazing. Well, good for you. And I'm glad that, because you're the leader, so you have to rally the troops,
Yep.
right? So you can only do that by inspiring them and getting them bought into your vision. So I
Yep.
love that you communicated that to them. So good for you. So what do you wish your 18-year-old self knew? What do you advice would you give?
I would say don't be afraid if the path you think is the path changes.
Yeah.
There's been so many changes from, thinking I was going to be a ballerina to
Yeah.
being a nurse, thinking I was going to practice at the bedside my whole career, moving into education and leadership, to not be so afraid of letting it happen.
Yeah.
When there's a fork in the road, just trust your gut, go with it, and the right thing usually does play out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Morgan, this has been a really, really enjoyable conversation. I've really learned a lot, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity. And I wish you so much success in everything that you're doing with Archer. So, tell me one last question. What do you wish more
Okay.
people knew?
What do I wish more people knew? Well, I think this is something that people know, but they maybe need to be a little bit reminded,
Uh-huh.
and they need to remember that if there's something out there you want to know, if there's something out there you want to achieve, you want to figure out, it is up to you to do it. We live in a day and age where the information is out there,
Yeah.
usually for free. You
Yeah.
can find out the answer to anything you want. So if there's something you don't know and you want to know it, you're making the choice not to know it. Go
Yeah.
out there, get it, follow your ambition, and you're the only one who can make it happen.
100% agree. Well, thank you so much, Morgan. This has been a really super enjoyable conversation. I am so grateful. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And then where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. The pleasure's been all mine. You can find us on all the socials at Archer Nursing, and then our website is archerreview.com.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate everyone's time today. We look forward to seeing you on another episode of the Pretty Powerful Podcast. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining our guests on the Pretty Powerful Podcast. And we hope you've gained new insight and learned from exceptional women. Remember to subscribe or check out this and all episodes on prettypowerfulpodcast.com. Visit us next time, and until then, step into your own power.